Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Trevor Callan, managing partner of AlphaCore, and I'm here with several of my partners who I'll introduce in a minute that are all representative of the firm tonight. I'm here with Dick Pfister, our CEO, and our special guest, Justin Gover. Thank you so much for doing this for us, Justin. This is going to be an incredible event. There's a lot of new folks in the crowd tonight, so I just want to give a quick introduction on AlphaCore, who we are, just for those that don't know us. AlphaCore is an independent wealth management and financial planning organization. Currently, we have we have offices in 8 offices in 7 states. La Jolla, where you're at tonight. And by the way, how's this venue, everybody? Pretty perfect. About as good as it gets. This is our flagship home office. And I just want to give a quick call out to the partners in the room here. If you can raise your hand of the partners that are joining us here today. We often say that AlphaCore is built by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. We are currently advising high net worth and ultra high net worth families that have entrusted of their hard-earned capital under our advisement, which obviously is a responsibility that we take very seriously. And I was trying to get my thoughts together for this introduction tonight, and I was asking myself, what do I attribute the success of AlphaCore to? And it really comes down to 3 things. The first is we're very, very narrowly focused on our niche. I always tell people we don't do a lot of things for a lot of people. Most of our clients, if not all, are very successful entrepreneurs that either cash flowed their way to success or oftentimes gone through some sort of a transaction. They're selling business, they're innovating, they're creating positive change. So that specialization is very key, because when we're dealing with a firm that might be generalist that toes into this world and makes a mistake, they can be quite large. The second thing I would say is we spent a lot of money and time over the years building out what we believe is a true family office deliverable. And that term family office in our industry is thrown out quite a bit. What it means for us day one is we try to emphasize for our clients that we are their independent. We don't work for any broker, dealer, bank, insurance company. Independent chief financial officer going well beyond managing money, well beyond financial planning, really taking a look at anything across the financial continuum and organizing that in a succinct way. And then lastly, what I'd say is that we're one of the last, and I can't say this for forever, but today we're one of the last remaining boutiques that are out there. There's been a lot of consolidation in our industry. When you're dealing with AlphaCore, you're usually dealing with a senior partner, 20-year plus veteran that owns the business, managing partners like myself, the CEOs, client-facing and forward-looking. The research group, which is amazing, is dealing with our clients on a day-to-day basis. So why under the microscope? We're really proud of this series of events. This is our second. We plan on doing this on an ongoing basis. And a lot of our clients, as I had mentioned, are innovators, entrepreneurs, and their teams that have innovated and created generational change. And what better area than San Diego to focus on the life sciences? Life sciences here in San Diego really is at the crosshairs between innovation and positive, innovative change. And so when you think about these events, and I go to a lot of them in town, I think what makes this under the microscope different is oftentimes we're thinking about the blockbuster drug and looking forward and all the great things that have happened. And we're going to talk about that tonight with Justin, as we certainly have that story. But we like to kind of take a step back and really ask Justin to give us the unsanitized version, really take us back to the beginning. All the trials and tribulations, what worked, what didn't work, what was going on in the minds of the entrepreneurs and the staff and so on and so forth. And if you think about life sciences, it's unbelievable that what goes into a success story like tonight. You've got research, which obviously we have a great research with Scripps and UCSD and the Salk here and the researchers and the research teams. You have to deal with patents in the legal community. You got to get that right. You got to get the trials right. You have to get the FDA right. And we're going to talk about all that. And that's a part of the story. But this story goes well beyond that. I mean, we're talking about international geopolitics, cultural differences, the differences between trying to get a company from the London Stock Exchange to the New York Stock Exchange and what the differences between those two things are. And more importantly than that, what Justin and his team did was they not only got a drug across the finish line, but they had to change the way we thought about an entire industry with the first cannabis-based drug that at the time, now today it's not that big of a deal, right? But at the time it was very controversial. Think about it. Cannabis was illegal in most states. Now think about trying to get a company public on the national exchange of the New York Stock Exchange with an illegal drug at the time. It's an amazing story. I've met Justin, Jamie, me and Lily are here. Where's me and Lily? Can you raise your hands? The family's here. It was funny because we've known each other for so long. I actually forgot where we met, and I actually called Justin the other day, and I said, "Where do we meet?" And he said, "Well, Bill and Debbie Carpenter, who happened to be here, they were coming to La Jolla from the UK, and they were buying a house in La Jolla, and Bill and Debbie represented them. And Jamie reminded me tonight that the first meeting we had was at the La Jolla Beach Tennis Club for my mom's retirement birthday, or my retirement party. And it was a little awkward because we had never met, and we're celebrating my mom's retirement party. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Justin for this time. And Dick, why don't you take the floor from here?
Thank you. Well, I want to say thank you to Trevor. I think the brainchild of Under the Microscope came from Trevor. And I think one of the things that it brings together is great people. Like you said, great entrepreneurs, kind of forward thinkers. But what's important about, I think, this story is you hear a lot of success stories in the business that we're in, a lot of different industries. We work with a lot of wealthy families, wealthy people across the country. But sometimes the story and the wealth doesn't match the people. And I can tell you unequivocally, Jamie and Justin and their family they're the family that deserve the success they have the most. They are highly honest, highly ethical, just great people. And when you meet people like that, you're like, we want them to be successful. You don't even know that the kind of trials and tribulations that Justin went through. And it is an incredible story. So I can't wait to ask Justin all these questions. It's kind of like a podcast format tonight. So it's a little bit longer form. It might go 3 hours. Just kidding. But we want to open it up to questions a little bit throughout the night. I'll start off with kicking off questions, but if you do have questions, just break it and ask me a question. We'll ask Justin. So Justin, we got to start from the beginning. You said this is the boring part. This is not a boring part. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, firstly, Trevor, Dick, thank you for having me here, and you've both become great friends, and our transition from London to La Jolla was made particularly special by the two of you and your families, so thank you for that. And thank you for having me to tell this story. It's a 22-year journey. I won't go through each year in great detail, but I'll start by saying that sort of 18 of those years were pretty miserable, and then ended up being a good few years at the end. But just in terms of my background, I, as you can probably tell, not originally from here. I grew up in London. I went to college in the UK. I spent some time in Asia before I came back to the UK. Ended up in the biotech world, sort of by accident. Did an MBA in France at a school called INSEAD, which is where I met my wife, Jamie. And then the GW story begins actually as soon as I graduated from business school.
So what was the idea generation? After you graduated business school, you start GW. What was the original concept theory? Did it end up being the way you thought it was at the beginning? What was the original concept?
Yeah, so I'm very careful when I tell the story to say this was not my idea. I'll take credit for some of this, but I won't take credit for the vision. I'm very fortunate that someone I used to work with early in my very early career, who was a physician in the UK, came to me to say, did I want to do this with him? And what I loved about this, and I was 28 at the time and sort of ready to take a risk and not really worry about the consequences, was the idea that I could both make a potential patient impact, do something that was kind of somewhat historic, incredibly challenging, and entrepreneurial, and combine all of that sort of together in a pretty unique way. I remember sort of trying to get to sleep on the first few nights after I decided to do this, and it was like, I'm going to have to change a lot of things about the world and how society thinks about this, let alone try and develop a drug, which is hard enough. The biotech industry is full of failure anyway, but to try and do what we were trying to do, as well as think about all the socio-political and cultural and other issues that we were going to have to face, was pretty daunting at the time.
Why don't we break it down for the people who don't know exactly what the drug is, what we're talking about? Can you just give us broad scope, the beginning part? What were you thinking at the time? Why was it epilepsy you were focused on? Tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll dive in a little deeper.
So again, as Trevor kind of said, this seems like so obvious now. It's kind of crazy, but this was 1998, 1999. cannabis, so this was in the UK too. So cannabis is, and still is, an illegal drug for both recreational and medical use in the UK. In the United States, California had legalized for medical use. A few other states had. But the whole basis of what of the vision and what we were trying to do was really to separate the plant, legal issues, social issues from science, medicine, and patients. So what the idea was that we would grow plants, but actually try to isolate molecules or combinations of molecules in the plant, put them through a rigorous sort of quality manufacturing process, do basic preclinical science, and then try to develop drug candidates through the conventional drug development process, take them to FDA, so that a patient who is sick doesn't need to go to at the time the dispensary didn't even exist, but go and grow some on their own, or figure out how to go to a bar or pub and find some weed, and actually go to a doctor, get a prescription, get insurance to pay for it, and know, first and foremost, that the drug they are getting is the drug that has been tested and that is safe, and it can get paid for. And so this was, again, it somewhat sounds obvious, but it was incredibly challenging as an idea to convince anyone that this was a good idea, mainly because of the topic, but also as an example of another complexity. There are very few, if any, good examples of a modern medicine derived from a plant that have been approved by a regulator. So we were dealing with plant issues, legal issues, cannabis stigma, and the fact that none of this had ever been done.
Well, and that's one of the things I think you as a founder would realize, is that not only were you doing all those things, you were trying to raise capital to offer or sell this idea to the world. What was that like when you were raising the first dollars to sell this story? Who were you going out to? Who did you reach out to raise the first, $1 million, $10 million, $100 million?
Yeah. So in the UK, they have the sort of prestigious Sunday newspaper is called the Sunday Times. And every year, the Sunday Times, I don't think they do this kind of thing here, but they publish what's called the Rich List. And they basically disclose like the 1,000 richest people in the country and explain how they made their money and who they are. They don't give you any contact information, but at least it's a good place to start. And so literally that's where I started. I'm like, no venture capitalist is ever going to fund this thing. I'm not going to be able to take this thing public for a while. And my friends were somewhat limited in their cash resource. So I literally started cold calling wealthy people. Wealthy people, it turns out, know other wealthy people. And getting the first sort of money to do this, it was hard, but actually to get a few $1 million actually wasn't too hard when you kind of ask for 50,000 here or 25,000 here. Getting then the real money to develop the drug is a different story.
Did you have a pathway at that time? Let's imagine you raised a few $1 million, $3-5 million. Did you then have to prove evidence at that time? And how long did it take from that point, the $5 million you raised, to actually having the evidence, the proof, to go to the next level? Well,
the great thing about biotech is, everyone in general understands this is a long journey, and as you say, there are kind of evidence points along the way. We had a few very small studies. We were looking mainly at pain treatment at the time. It seemed like the obvious place to start for a cannabis-based drug. So much literature and history of the use of cannabis in pain that it seemed like a lower risk proposition. So we were able to use this money to, we literally had to, go to the DEA equivalent, get a license. It was super secret. No one could ever know where we were. We had to sort of screen every employee. No guests were ever allowed. We grew these. It was like a cross between an operating theater, a spaceship, and a greenhouse. It was really cool. And then we developed this formulation and tested in a few patients, got some early promising data, and then actually pretty quickly because I was convinced that no venture capitalists would fund this, we kind of pivoted pretty much straight into the public market.
Okay, so that's when you went on the London Stock Exchange. And how was that? How was that process going public on the LSE?
Well, again, there's a theme throughout this, which is there's really good and bad things about the cannabis link. The cannabis link can be really helpful in certain cases. It sort of grabs people's attention. It's really not a boring meeting when you hear about what we do, and so it allowed me to get indoors, get a lot of publicity, and get people excited about the concept relatively easily. That was good in a very short term, but I don't have a graphic here, but if I were to show you a share price graph for the first decade, none of you would be very happy if your AlphaCore managers had put you into our stock. We listed at £1.82. Within about a month, we were at about £1, and 13 years later, we're at 60 pence.
So, and I think I can attest to what you're talking about. There 20 years ago, the idea of cannabis was everywhere. People would take the meetings. People would like to hear it. They knew there was promise there, but you had to go prove it, right? And at my old firm, there was a venture fund that we had that would invest in this, and a lot of it went to zero, right? The investments they made went to zero. But you all also knew that if you made 100 investments, maybe there were 2 or 3 that were going to be the unicorns. So you had to prove it to everybody else that you could be that unicorn.
Yeah, and I think we had to separate this from, this was not, we weren't asking people to invest in a dispensary or believe that somehow we would magic up some potion that would cure everyone. And I had to also, there were believers out there too that were all ironically kind of problematic sometimes, because there are people in that world who think it's going to cure everything. And it's not a miracle drug, and it's far from it, and it's not, particularly safe either, unless it's administered appropriately. So, on both sides, we were kind of the enemies of both. We had the cannabis evangelists that we were the corporatization of marijuana, which they hated, and then we had these sort of anti-drugs groups who thought we were sort of legalizers, and that, in our spare time, we were putting on sort of hair extensions and handing around a bong. And so we were stuck somewhere in the middle of people neither of whom believed the other. It was quite interesting.
Well, so yeah, Justin has shown us the chart. If you go back and look at the old charts, it is a dismal looking chart. But then you told us about this kid named Sam, which really changed everything. So can you tell us about that and walk us through that?
Yeah. So, to summarize the first 12 years, I say you've heard about the share price, I won't say that again, but ironically, by the end of the 12th year, we'd actually achieved some success. We developed a drug for multiple sclerosis that had got approved in the UK and in other European countries. The problem was that, 1, the market for that wasn't very big. 2, because we had no money for so much of this time, I'd sold the rights to that drug to other companies. So in effect, the economics of that were kind of somewhat useless. And so a few things happened, 2 things happened which completely transformed the company, the most important of which is this story that Dick mentioned. So, as I said, we founded the company in 1998. I'm taking you now to 2012. So we were still a UK company, no presence in the United States. And also, importantly, to say as a precursor to the story, we had no experience of doing any clinical work in the field of epilepsy. That said, we had done some preclinical work. So what we were looking at was different molecules in the plant, screening them for different diseases, and one of those was epilepsy. And we published some preclinical sort of animal data in a relatively obscure journal, showing some anti-seizure effects of CBD, one of the cannabinoids, one of the molecules in the plant. This family in California had, at the time, a boy. He was 8 years old. His name is Sam, and Sam had been born having had serious seizures and had seizures throughout the first 8 years of his life. His family had put him on pretty much every drug that was available. There are diets, ketogenic diet, and other things that kids try when they're trying to resolve seizures.
Can you say how many seizures a day was he having?
Dozens. It depended, and I'll talk about his journey to London. But on that day, he had 60 seizures, including on the flight over. His mum actually put the blanket over him during the flight because she thought they would turn the plane around if they found him. So So what happened was that Sam's parents read this paper that we'd done. They kind of found us through a few different contacts, called us, told us about him, and said, "Can you help? And could you send us some CBD?" And we were like, "No, it's illegal, and we've never tested CBD on a human, let alone a kid, and we've never tested on anyone with epilepsy other than a rat." And so this obviously became something that was intriguing to us because we had a family that wanted some access. This was at the time not about drug development. We just wanted to help Sam and see if it were possible. So it took us a few months to decide how we could figure this out. And what we ended up having to do was say, well, look, if you can bring Sam to London from San Francisco, we have got in touch with a epilepsy specialist, a pediatric epileptologist at Children's Hospital in London. She has agreed to see Sam, and if she thinks it's appropriate, we will make a formulation for him, which she will then prescribe to him in the hospital. And that's legal as a kind of single patient prescription. That would be a legal thing to do under the supervision of a doctor. So he came, and as I just told you about the story of the journey, he came with his mum. He had 67 seizures the day he arrived. He did end up getting prescribed this formulation that we had developed for him. And he was...
How was that delivered? Was it a pill?
It was a solution.
Solution?
Yeah, and he was seizure-free a week later. He had no seizures at all. And his mum sent me a photo of him. Over the holiday season in London, they have this huge fair in Hyde Park. It's like, wheels and lights and everything. We're like, you shouldn't take this kid with seizures to a fairground. But they did, and she sent me this photo of him smiling. He'd just done some kind of like zip line thing. And it was just, and she wrote to us at the end of this trip saying, this has, been the most extraordinary couple of weeks of our lives, and thank you. But of course, then she said, well, we have to go home. Can we take this home? And of course, the answer to that is no. So he did fly home. He started having seizures again. And then we spent several months talking to the DEA and the FDA to see if we could get his physician in California to prescribe him this medication, which, bear in mind, hadn't been approved by FDA, hadn't been endorsed by them for clinical trials. We didn't have any kind of data to give them. Anyway, a long story short, we did manage to get approval from both these agencies to import products specifically for him. They needed armed guards at UCSF in order to store and administer this drug. Armed guards for a non-intoxicating cannabinoid formulation. And then, so we, had this obviously whirlwind experience. We managed to get the product to him. The same physician had another child in a somewhat similar position. A few months later, we managed to get approval to treat the second child, a boy called Ben. And then we were sitting here going, well, we have to do something about this. We seem to have this extraordinary impact on these two children. We'd never done any work in the United States. The FDA had never sort of approved anything. The DEA didn't know anything about us. But we managed to get a lot of epilepsy doctors in the US started to hear about this.
Sure.
And at the time, there was also a bit of PR. Some of you may remember this. There was a CNN documentary, Sanjay Gupta made it, about a girl in Colorado who's also benefiting. So there was a whole series of events that led to us being able to treat these two boys, that then led to trials and everything that followed from that, which I'm happy to talk about. But I just want to end this part by saying that if I wound forward 3 years later, when we were in front of the FDA, FDA hold a public advisory meeting when they approve novel drugs, and Sam flew over from the Bay Area to DC and stood up in front of the FDA and said, I'm the first person to do this. I've been seizure-free for 5 years. I want to be a neurologist when I grow up. And, he'd just been away on his own for the first time. And you don't see regulators crying very often, but this was one of those moments.
That is amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. Come on. So amazing. So walk us through the different, now this is where it might get political. We won't go too down to political rabbit hole, but what was the difference in the UK versus the United States? Why were they, or that physician or doctor, willing to prescribe it and it wasn't available here? And then take us to the journey of going from the LSE to the NASDAQ, because that's also, I think, important.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say, the UK, I think the premise of your question is it's easier in the UK, and some things are, but actually, in this case, I don't think we could have done this as quickly as we actually ended up doing in the United States. I think, in general, in our industry, a lot of early studies are done outside the US. There's a lot of bureaucracy that I think prevents early development in the US. But actually, when it comes to later stage development, the US is a great place to do it. Again, culturally, it's in this particular case of the sort of topic of cannabis, you have this sort of slightly bizarre situation where you have the US, which is actually incredibly tolerant, and particularly now, I mean, we could DoorDash it here in 2 seconds. You couldn't do that in the UK, and you can't do that in Europe. It's a really interesting, difficult, and odd situation where you have very different laws addressing very different things, and both sets of laws are a bit of a mess, actually. Dealing with the financial bit, as Trevor alluded to, we were having had this story, we were like, we have to list on the United States stock market because it's the only way we're ever going to raise any money to do this. And it takes hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a drug, if not more. And so we had to, we had to bridge from London to NASDAQ. It hadn't really been done in our industry before, so we were having to straddle both sets of jurisdictions. And it was a real struggle. With the IPO and NASDAQ was not a great success. But all we wanted was the listing, and then everything went from there. But as Trevor said, it was quite interesting even talking to an investment bank about whether they would represent us. And even later, when we launched our drug, we couldn't get a major bank to give our sales force a credit card.
Wow. Yeah, I heard that's still a problem right now. Banking for any company like that still is difficult.
Yeah, but this was a FDA-approved, NASDAQ-listed company with it was nuts.
So just what was the time frame from the first days you gave Sam the drug and then when you got FDA approval? How long did that take?
So it was Christmas 2012. We got approval 5 years later. So in drug development terms, that from nothing, that is pretty extraordinary. Because what was so special about this is we had the epilepsy community. We actually literally were having to turn children away from clinical trials, which is a horrible thing to do. So in parallel with the trials, we actually set up a compassionate access program because it was heartbreaking. So by the time we'd launched the drug commercially, we actually had a couple of thousand children on the drug on a compassionate basis.
Excellent. So walk us through the part of the other side of this is running the business. Bringing people on, the HR. As a founder, you're trying to hire people. What was that part like? Because you had to scale up, right? As you're doing this, going through FDA approval. What was that part of running the business?
Well, I mean, I loved that bit, but I think I loved it particularly because it was happening here. I realized, and you heard that we moved here, a decade ago. But the reason I moved was because I just don't think, it's hard enough to be successful in any industry in any country. But if you in the United States, I think running a company from Europe and trying to figure out how to be successful here and how to understand the healthcare system as well.
Sure.
It's very hard. So I moved here, and then we started hiring people here. So I ended up with about 1,500 people, about 800 in the UK, the rest in the United States. And I love building an organization here in the United States, but it was fun to try to build a kind of a transatlantic sort of UK-US company. We speak the same language, but we really do not work in the same way at all.
Why San Diego, Justin? Boston or San Francisco?
You can ask Jamie that question.
His wife.
Do I really need to elaborate? Look behind you. Yeah.
So that scaling up of running the business while you're doing it, then going through FDA, when you got approved formally, then what was it like? What was the capital raise like then? What did you go from, your 60 pence?
Yeah.
Then what did the stock price do after that?
Yeah, so from it's easier for me then so 60 pence ended up equating to about a $7 shop price. Is obviously not a currency conversion, but a stock. And so we ended up listing at that kind of price level. We ended up selling the company for $220. So it was about 25 times.
Amazing.
But that required us to raise about $1.5 billion.
Oh.
And again, I say this, full of, I love this country. I love working here. But it is impossible to imagine building this kind of company, raising that kind of money anywhere else. It's impossible. I spend a lot of my time today. I'm sort of a bit of I have a sort of slightly mixed reputation in the UK because every time I speak to a British company, I'm like, you need to move, which is not a great message for my British colleagues, but it is true. It is, and it's actually become the case. Most British companies, most European companies do not list on a European stock exchange now. They come straight to NASDAQ. And it's because America is, the depth of capital, the sophistication is just unparalleled, and it will never be rivaled.
Yeah, I think we could have a whole other session about that, the depth of our capital markets versus the rest of the world, not just Europe, but you also have different analyst coverage, different sector coverage. Just the maturity of it is where you get the kind of fundraising you can get at $1.5 billion of fundraising.
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone knows if you invest in a biotech company, if 1 in 10 work, that's amazing. No other jurisdiction has the depth of capital to withstand that risk level. And also there's a level of sophistication here, which is you just don't see anywhere else. So in the UK, I would go in and go to Fidelity or somewhere and explain what we do. And they were like, you mean this trial might fail? Like, yeah, that's kind of how, that's the business. And so it was impossible. And it was like, no, we don't do that.
Yeah, that's wild. Well, you're talking to some biotech life science people here. They know.
Yeah.
And so then, did you think you were going to sell? Did you have an idea that there was going to be somebody who's going to come along? Were you ready to do that when it happened?
No, I mean, it is quite common in our industry that M&A is obviously, pretty much a constant feature of biotech. I have to say, in our case, I having talked to many drug companies at various points for different reasons over the 20 plus years, even with an FDA-approved drug, we were still a real oddity. Most drug companies were like, we don't do that.
Right.
Even though it at that point made no sense. We had essentially created a drug with this in a field of where there's a terrible unmet need, with a brand new mechanism, which is what people want, with a huge demand. So I was happy for us to own it and to continue to build it. And we certainly weren't looking to sell.
And then how did that process go about? So Jazz came in. When did that happen?
Yeah, so we ended up selling to a company called GW Pharmaceuticals, which is a sort of specialty pharma company. At the time, it was about a 10 billion market cap company. It's probably double that now. But it's they approached, as often happens in our business, or now public information, they approached us totally out of the blue. I mean, I knew that I'd met the CEO once, I think, but it was a COVID situation. So they approached us. We said no. Spent 6 months of saying no.
Right.
So that was yeah, and then eventually, they raised their price to a point where you kind of haven't really got much choice but to say yes. What was particularly odd about this was, as I said, I bumped into the CEO once, but didn't know him. No one had ever met, and during the entire process, even when they actually bought the company, it was COVID. So
Wow.
no one, literally, there was not a single face-to-face meeting until Jamie and I went up for a dinner with the CEO and his wife to shake hands as we closed the deal. And so they bought this company. I mean, there aren't many people that would buy a company growing cannabis plants and things like that and not want to at least see if it's real. But they did.
But at the time, so this is what I found fascinating. At the time, how many patients were you treating then, and how many are now, and what has it gone since they acquired?
Yeah, so I mean, because we were very fortunate, we were able to build an incredibly talented launch team, but we also had this amazing sort of set of advocates from doctors, and patients knew about this. So this was a launch that actually went incredibly well. We sold in the first 12 months, I think, $250 million, and it went to 500 in year 2.
Wow.
It's now at about a 1.5 run rate.
Wow.
We'll see if it, but that's about what we were expecting to see. It's the largest branded epilepsy drug in the United States.
Right.
I should say it's not a drug that treats all forms of epilepsy, and it's mainly focused on highly intractable childhood onset seizure disorders.
So I want to open up to questions in a second here, but so since you sold, you've joined some charitable organizations. You're involved with a few that we know personally, but there's one that you're involved with now that is also directly related. So we'd love to hear about that. Tell us what you're doing today with that particular charity. The one that's involved with epilepsy.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I can talk about voices if
we
you
can talk about voices for children too. We won't talk. We can do that one too.
Yeah. So I chair a non-profit in the epilepsy space called Cure Epilepsy. It's the largest non-governmental funder of research in epilepsy. It's founded by parents of children with epilepsy 25 years ago who, you can see the theme, unbelievable frustration with, and I get this today. I still get parents calling me, and the way kids are treated with these seizures is still shockingly bad. But there's, in general, the statistic hasn't really changed over the last 20 years, which is about a third of people with epilepsy are treatment resistant and essentially cycle through drug after drug, trial and error type medicine, and are never seizure free. And so there's just this hardcore, and it's a sizable condition too. Epilepsy is much more common than you might think. It's millions of people in the United States. The need is really still there.
I just think it's impressive that you and Jamie are very charitable. They're the type of people that give back. You had a lot of success, but you're really adamant about giving back to the community. We've known you guys for a long, long time, and you've taught your children to be that way. So it's impressive to see that, and it's great to see. It's really refreshing, and I think we're just happy that you're here, happy to be friends with you. Does anybody have questions for Justin? I thought we'd open up for a few questions. Anybody? There we go. Yeah.
So after acquisition, did they take the whole team, or they kept the majority of the operation still involved in the operation, or it was completely integrated into Dublin?
So because they bought the company without knowing anyone, they had to rely on me to tell them. Well, I tried to make sure they kept everyone, because I don't know how you could have run this company or figured anything out without the people that had grown up with it. Naturally, over time, things change, and the senior people have all left now, and there's a mix of people. But a bit frustrating. We didn't talk about this, but my only frustration with it really is we had other stuff going on earlier stage. I mentioned pain earlier. We kind of not really focused on pain any further, but we had other ideas of other neurological conditions that we were researching and looking to treat, and all of that closed down. And that's pretty common, unfortunately, when companies are bought. But I think they've done a really nice job of maintaining their focus on the patient and making sure this medicine is used by the right people. So in that, I'm pretty grateful. It's one of those deals actually where both sides ended up being pretty happy. I think it was a right exit after 22 years for a lot of our shareholders, and they'll have ended up actually getting a pretty good deal.
Thank you so much.
Another one?
I'll do a technical question if I can. You must have thought about making the compound synthetically and get away from the whole weed thing. So how did that ever transpire?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously, yes, you can make all these cannabinoids synthetically. It's not that complicated, actually. We'd reached the point where we were so good at manufacturing this through the growing plants, extracting, isolating, and formulating that, we'd built all that know-how, we'd invested in all the capital. It kind of made no sense to start from scratch. It actually ended up, we did the math. It really didn't make any difference from a cost of goods perspective. And it was not entirely obvious that necessarily why, and maybe it is to everyone else, but there was a value, at least as far as patients could see, with it coming from a plant. Physicians didn't care, but patients did, actually, and I think it helped at the margin.
Yeah.
How is it administered, and what's the effectiveness? Is it intramuscular injection?
No, it's a solution. It's an oral. So because this was developed for children, it is a liquid. You just swallow it.
And what's the level of effectiveness after that? The duration of years or months? Or?
Well, you take it. It's a daily administration.
Oh.
So you just it's not a one-time thing. So you just take it like you take any other medicine once a day.
Wonderful story.
And finally, we've actually the company that bought us has just managed to develop a capsule formulation, because I think there are a lot these children grow up, and if you're 40, 50 years old, taking an oral solution every day is not ideal. So that's been a constraint, actually.
I'm running a company right now that's involved with an itch medication and a GERD medication and a shingles effective medication, and we're right at the first step of the journey that you've been.
Okay.
And so it's very fascinating and interesting to me to hear your story, and I congratulate you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
More questions? There we go. There's one me.
Hey, thanks for being here and congratulations. I'm so happy for Sam and everybody else who's affected by this. So when Jazz got in and they started looking, created a data room or whatever you did, did you then try to create a competitive situation, and how did that go?
Yeah, so there's become a bit of a pretty much the M&A process in biotech has ended up almost always with the initial bidder being the winning bidder. That's it. If every investment bank with their pitch will give you all this data, and it because these stories all become public because they go through SEC filings, so you can see exactly what's happened. We reached and obviously there's pros and cons to if you have a bid of trying to do a market check. Most of the time that doesn't end up leading to anything, particularly if there's no prior relationship. So this was a COVID era deal. No other company had been sniffing around for a little bit. And so to get another company up to speed, expect them to pay more, and risk turning off our bidder was a risk that we didn't want to take. So it was easier for me to just keep saying no and then figure out at some point how to bring them to the right number. And I did think that they were a company that would do the right thing for our employees and for the product, and that did matter to me.
More questions? There's one.
Just high level on the technology for those of us that don't understand. I mean, CBD is everywhere. What was patentable? What did you do with the plant that makes it different than just going to your local?
Yeah. It's so funny because literally for 18 of 20 years, I'd say CBD, and everyone was like, what are you talking about? The only thing that anyone knew was THC. I mean, the whole initial pitch was, I mentioned earlier about the plant and patients, but actually the pitch was, you think cannabis is THC. Cannabis is not THC. Cannabis is a whole bunch of other stuff, and CBD is probably the most interesting. And it's interesting now to be in a situation where actually everyone knows what CBD is. I should say that this formulation is, much more concentrated, and the doses we are giving are an order of magnitude high. If you go and buy CBD in any form, this is not the same. This will not treat seizures in any of these products. The doses are very high. I realize I will come back to your question, but I also want to say that is also why safety is so important with these things. This drug actually has problematic side effects. You may think it's natural, it's CBD, what could go wrong? But there are real, it has effects on the liver. The patients have to go through some liver tests before they're given it. And that kind of information just wouldn't be available if you just had a free-for-all. So it kind of goes back to my original point, that doing this the right way and providing the right data for doctors and safety of patients is paramount here. And just because something's natural does not mean it's safe. In answer to your question, though, it was mainly around, so we obviously couldn't protect the molecule, it's natural compound, so we were able to protect mainly its use. So we had patents around the use of CBD in various types of epilepsy. The formulation itself was proprietary to us. So we had a kind of suite of patents that enabled us to make it commercially viable.
More questions? Yeah.
Yeah, my son has epilepsy, my youngest son, so I commend you for going into a field where there's not a lot of research and not a lot of money flows into epilepsy research, and so I thank you very much. And I'm just curious, if you were to run a clinical trial today, and how would you incorporate like a synthetic arm? You mentioned earlier that a lot of patients wanted to participate in the trial and parents wanted their children to participate in the trial, but would a synthetic arm help to be the control arm for your study? And how would you design the trial today if you could do it differently?
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your son, and if I can help in any way, if we need a reference for a physician, just let me know. But it's just a function of I think with this kind of research, we did the trials that we ran were gold standard placebo-controlled studies. There's no other way of doing it, really. You have to provide in trials patients that have been through a lot of other medications. They stay on the medications they're on, whatever those happen to be. You should never take patients off a treatment during a trial. And you have to placebo has to be part of it, otherwise FDA pay no attention. At least in these kind of trials, though, patients who go into the trials, once they complete the trial, get access to the drug over the long term. So, there is a bit of hardship for a patient because you don't know if you're on the active or the placebo for a short period, but you get access to it at the end. I wouldn't design them any differently, and we could have run a synthetic trial. We just decided not to. It didn't make sense for us to do that.
One more over there.
Hi, Justin. Thank you so much for sharing so fascinating story. So biotech with after pandemic, hitting rock bottom. We see these days they trying to invest in late stage assets.
Yeah.
So what's your advice for early stage? Where are they going to get capital?
Yeah. Biotech, just as markets do, but biotech is particularly susceptible to sentiment and swings. And there are years where the doors are literally closed. It's just impossible. And like COVID, of course, 2020 was a golden era for biotech. I mean, you had an idea and you go public and raise a few $100 million, and then a couple of years later, it's like everyone realized that was a terrible idea, and then all the doors are closed. I'm on the board of a couple of companies that had tried to raise money last year and couldn't. This year's been better, actually, because everything stems from the public markets. If the public markets are working, investors have money to put back, and VCs have exits. And the cycle is a beautiful cycle when it's working, and it's a shocking cycle when it's not. But it is working now. It wasn't. So I actually think now's not a bad time.
If you want to talk to our team, we have a venture team that specifically allocates to biotech and life science. So our clients get exposure to a couple of direct funds, and we also have a fund of funds in biotech and life science too. So there is, to Justin's point, it has picked up quite a bit. The re-rating environment that went on in 2022 it made it very difficult for that particular vintage. But today's vintages are actually getting more and more liquid, and there's definitely more money to find today. Any more questions?
Yeah, it sounds like Sam was a very compelling story at your advisory committee meeting. I was curious what the outcome vote for that was, and if there was any points of contention that you still had to overcome going into your approval.
No, it was a wonderful day, one of the best days of my life, apart from the birth of my 2 girls here, and my marriage.
Wait.
Had to get all 3 in. No, but it was an extraordinary day, and FDA were, all the advisors were just actually incredibly complimentary. Like it was one of those days where everyone was just grateful, and I think Sam set the tone for it. But it was followed by a lot of, there are a lot of advocates particularly for these extreme forms of epilepsy, and so they were very powerful. There's nothing available, and even if you didn't approve of some of the concepts, it's like how could you not allow this to be made available? And there was every reason to. So it worked out. I should say, by the way, Sam is still seizure free. I speak to his dad or mama once or twice a year.
Pretty amazing.
And he's when I last spoke to Dad, he said, look, we expected to be caring for Sam in our home for the rest of his life. He went to college. He's now got a job somewhere in Oregon. He's just living his life. He's incredible.
What an amazing story, right? Can you give Justin a round of applause? I want to ask you one more question, and then we have to, I think, wrap it up so everybody can watch the sunset. But the day doesn't go by when we don't talk about artificial intelligence. So given that you've come from the world you came in, there are many, many promises for what AI can do for medicine. Have you given it any thought? Do you think there's promise there? Have you seen any evidence of it? This world of AI.
I'm definitely not the expert on this field, but I would say the answer to me at the moment is there's been a few very high-profile sort of AI biotech startups that have raised untold amounts of money with incredibly high-profile, well-respected people in the field. There's nothing to show for that yet. And in the kind of biotech companies that I'm involved with, at the moment, AI, is mainly, document writing. It's not drug discovery yet. I'm sure it's going to come, but it feels like we're a long way off in drug development. But it makes perfect sense that you would be screening drugs and reducing animal testing and reducing the time it takes to get through to human trials. But it feels like we're in very early days.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Justin.
Before we wrap, we talk about the summit.
Yes.
And actually, keep your emails open to the next event under the microscope. We have a number of great speakers lined up, so hopefully you'll make it back. But before we wrap, the summit that's coming up.
Yeah, of course. So to Trevor's point, we're going to do this. We try to do this type of event under the microscope every 6 weeks. But our next event is called the AlphaCore Wealth Summit. This is the 4th annual year we've done it. It is right in La Jolla. It's a 2-day event, but the first night is just a party out on this patio. We expect to have 500 people on this patio on September 30th, actually. And then the actual summit's on October 1st. And it's at the Conrad, so right down the street across from the lot. And we will have a panel of people like Justin. So multiple panels. It has become an incredibly fun event where you can have a great time, but you can also an educational event. So we have money managers, we have charitable giving panels, We this year we have a celebrity author named Ryan Holiday, who, if you know anything about Stoicism, he's written books called The Obstacle is the Way, Stillness is the Key, Ego is the Enemy. Incredible author. We'll have some athletes there as well, but it's really a cross section of great content. So I encourage you. There's no cost to come. You can just go to AlphaCore.com and you click on the summit and register. We'd love to see everybody there, and we'd love to see you at our next Under the Microscope. But thank you so much, Justin. Thank you, Jamie, for supporting him through all this.
Well, thank you, and I should say I love working with you guys. So thank you for allowing me to do this today.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.